What are some common mistakes people make when buying a new bike?
Firstly, buying the wrong size. Sizes aren't standardized between different bikes. So, for instance, a 52 centimeter bike from one brand is not going to be the same as a 52 centimeter bike from another brand, essentially. It's going to be based on whether they've measured the top tube or the C tube. Is it sloping? There's a lot of factors. So, big thing I would say is don't just assume that if you're going into a bike shop and you've been riding a 52 centimeter Cervelo and you buy a Colnago, that 52 centimeters is going to be the same size. Check the other measurements.
I feel like bike design has got so complicated now that you can't just look at a size, exactly like you're saying, and it means something. They've all got slightly different seat angles. They've all interpret how they measure things in different ways. And it's just so complicated to work out what bike you need.
It is. And you get loads of bike fitters go out there saying everything works on reach and stack. But I would say, unfortunately, reach and stack only really works if it's the same bike again with the same angles. The angles are completely different. Your reach and stack figures will be affected by how many headset spaces you've got or what your saddle height is.
Or the angle of your seat tube.
Yes. So, well, because of that, yeah. So you need to imagine it as a triangle, essentially.
Or head tube as well, yeah.
There's a lot of things. Secondly, the size you have now doesn't mean your new bike is going to be the same size. You need to start considering if you're on a time trial bike or road bike and you switch into a gravel bike or a different type of discipline, or if it's a more endurance bike versus more of a crit racing bike, angles and things change slightly. Not so much your frame size, but your stem length could be different.
Is there a general rule, like if you were going from road to gravel?
We, as a generalization in our shop, we would say, generally speaking, if you're going from a road bike that you ride regularly to a gravel bike, I would say consider slightly shorter, slightly higher. Mm-hmm. And that's more got to do with not the position you can ride in, but just lifting your bike over things. Bunny hops it's just a bit more of it's a different riding position. You're also riding slightly slower, so you don't need that aggressive position for aerodynamics.
So essentially what you're saying here is based on what you're actually using the bike for may mean that you need a different size bike or componentry, because it isn't just as simple as saying a gravel bike versus a road bike in the same size means that they've done that work for you.
Yeah.
So knowing all of that, as a customer, what are you actually meant to do? You can say, a common mistake is buying the wrong size. Things aren't standardized. You need different stuff. What are you meant? How do you then find what you actually need?
Can I start with this one? First, I would say is, and from my experience, is working with or having a good independent bike shop. The chances are they are going to do more for you than if working with an online retailer. Because I remember buying, you built a bike for me, and we chucked a stem on it. It was a new bike, completely different geometry. It was one of the weird little custom bikes that I did. And I was like, Nick, I think this stem's not quite right. I think I need a different one. You were like, no worries, just bring it in, we'll swap it out. And I was like, and granted, we were mates, but even then I was still just kind of like, that's mint. Because I just assumed, all right, I'm going to have to buy another stem. This is rubbish. But the chances are, if you're working with a good bike shop, they're going to be in a position that they can swap it out, assuming you haven't trashed it.
Yeah, well, we do basically saddle height you can change on a bike easily by just an Allen key or quick release lever, depending on your bike. The main things I think that affects things are saddle and stem length. So with both of those, we try and run a thing of where buy a bike with a stem, which we recommend with a bit of consultation, bike fit, and looking at things. If you're not happy with it, we can swap it out to try something else. We always recommend as well, if you're going to buy a sturdy titanium stem, which is a very expensive stem, or something really fancy, always try and buy something cheap first to try.
Just like a really sturdy, strong stem.
Sturdy. It's just it's a lovely titanium brand out there.
Yeah, if you don't know, sturdy is a brand.
Yes. So, yeah, try out different lengths. We're happy to swap it out. I think with your bike, Emily, we did your saddle. You had a saddle that we thought would be great. You didn't like it, and we swapped it for a different one. Mm-hmm. I think Jimmy ended up buying 3 of them afterwards.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's good business for the bike shop. A lot of brands will help you out with that as well.
I guess if you are not in the position where you do have a good bike shop near you, then we've kind of talked about this before, haven't we? Of try to borrow, get stuff secondhand, get cheap stuff from people around you or businesses around you, just to test. The more you can test, the more knowledge you will gain, I guess.
Yeah,
before
totally.
you're making large, expensive purchases.
Yep. I definitely like the idea of If you are in a position that you can afford a really expensive carbon set of bars that cost loads of money and a fancy stem, then, and if it's a new thing to you, you probably are still better off buying the really, really cheap equivalent, especially with stem length, to get an idea of how long it's going to be before then spending the lot of money on the carbon bars. Like I've got the odd set of bars that I foolishly spent stupid money on, like the ones we cut down for my hill climbing bike, that you just end up wasting money on. It's such a shame, such a waste.
Lastly, on that one, I would also say bar width is easily measured and use indication, but you need to also really look into the bar shape. Certain bars, your hoods of the levers are going to sit in weird positions. Some of them are going to be swept forward, which is going to be less comfortable, but more aerodynamic. Some swept back. So just look into shape as well, not just width. That's not the only measurement you need to take into consideration. But yeah, speak to your local bike shop.
Next.
Number 2, getting sucked in by group set choice is a common mistake.
How so?
Take, for instance, you get 2 bike brands and they both have 2 bikes spec'd with, I'm going to use 105 because that's probably the most common group set out there. It doesn't mean the 2 bikes are the same. That's like saying buying a 2-bedroom house in London because it's got 2 bedrooms is the same as buying a 2-bedroom house in Newcastle because they've got 2 bedrooms. Trust me, it's a completely different house and you're going to pay a different amount for it. But it's not the same. You can't just measure. Group set choice essentially gives you very little back. The modern higher end or mid-level group sets all shift the same. They work just as well. The big thing is going to be a weight difference. But that weight difference is going to be so tiny that you could negate that with other things like with mountain bike tire choice, handlebar, stem, seat post. You could claw all the weight back for a lot less money. So don't just compare bikes based on group sets. Look at several factors.
Also, bear in mind that if a good bike, it doesn't matter how much it weighs. I know this will trigger loads of people, but I've ridden a lot of bikes now, and the good ones do not need to be light.
Exactly. It's not going to make... So in some instances, I would even go as far as a 2 lighter bike's going to not ride as nice as you want, because to get at that light, there's a negative impact. And
also on the sort of having ridden tons of bikes now, is the difference between group sets, and I think you maybe mentioned it, is just so marginal now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like there really is very little difference between any of them, and it just comes down to preference and how you want it to look and how much money you've got to spend.
If you were to flip it over, if you took, arguably, depending on what it is, the best bike in the world, or one of the Tour de France bikes that people are racing on, and I stick a set of Marathon Plus tires on it, it's going to ride like an actual, it's going to feel like you've got wooden wheels.
Yeah.
So
again, from my experience, you 100% do notice the difference between a very entry-level set of wheels / tires and super, super high-end wheels and tires.
I would just caveat that of saying, before you buy wheels, just because they're very expensive, doesn't always mean they're better.
Yeah, totally.
Another common mistake is buying a full new bike every time. Excluding having issues with compatibility or a different discipline, so going from a road bike to a time trial bike or room brake to disc brake, I feel that you always get more value by spending your budget on upgrades for a bike. So, for instance, I split a bike down into 4 categories: frame set, wheel set, finishing kit, group set. Pick 1 or 2 of those categories, or 3, depending on how much your budget allows, and upgrade that. You'll get a lot more value for money rather than buying a bike for, let's say, £1,000 and then next year buying a new bike for £1,200. That extra £200 might not be a better bike. Inflation or COVID might just mean you're buying the same bike again with slightly better, or going from a 105 to an Ultegra group set isn't going to give you as much benefit as, let's say, spending your full budget on wheels and finishing kit. And then in a few years down the line, you've got a bit more money, you can upgrade even more. Eventually, you'll end up with a much better bike than just those tiny incremental...
As we mentioned
gains,
last week, it's a good one.
But saying that, if you have to buy a new bike, like you said, discipline changes or it's your first bike or something like that, I would say your initial purchase is by far the most important. So if you need to spend a little bit more to get a much better wheel set or something that you really want, do that, because when you buy a bike, you're buying a complete bike. So spending a bit more on your wheels means you're getting the wheels you actually want, rather than buying a bike for slightly less, but with the wrong wheels, and then later having to buy new wheels. I'm just using wheels as an example over here, because when you buy the new wheels, you're going to have to pay full price for the new wheels and you'll lose all the value you've paid already for the other wheels. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, so I guess what you're saying there is, and I think this probably really applies to custom builds or where you're working with a shop to spec things out. If you're at the point of purchase, you can probably get a better set of wheels for maybe 200 quid extra, that if you were to then have to buy them as a whole wheel set, having already bought a lower quality one, you probably have to spend £800, for example.
Yes, exactly. The next one is falling for the marketing out there. Simple one was back in the day, I'm going to use Victoria as an example. They released a set of tires and the marketing slogan said it's 40% faster.
Compared to what?
Exactly. That's exactly my thing. I had a lad working in the shop for me at the time, and he said to a customer this exact thing: this will make you 40% faster. And I had to interject straight away. I'm like, whoa, you can't say that to people. Because if I'm riding at 30 kilometers / 18 miles an hour at the moment, average speed, comfortably, by being 40% faster means I'm winning the Tour de France next year. So all I have to do is buy those tires.
And the man in the shop,
Yeah.
Tadej Pogacar.
He was right. The same thing goes with aero gains, wattage gains. Just test things. If they're saying it's going to give you 10 extra watts, yes, they might have gotten 10 extra watts in their testing at 500 watts. But that means you have to ride 500 watts before you get your 10 extra watts, which most of us, normal mere mortals, are not going to do on an everyday basis. So just essentially, I'm not saying marketing is bad, but just take it with a pinch of salt and think about it logically.
Ultimately, the more you can try, the better you're going to be. The more informed you're going to be. Something which we think is a really good source, or something I think is a really good source of trying stuff, is ask your mates. Everyone's got bits and pieces laying around. If you're thinking maybe I'd be better off with a 80mm stem instead of a 100mm one, just drop your mates a message and just be like, does anyone have a stem I can borrow, so you can give it a try rather than having to buy it. Similarly, you can ask shops and get some. There's usually going to be parts bins and things that you can try stuff from.
We've got demo saddles and things like that. I've lent people pedals before. There's a lot of things. Other stuff's much easier. Handlebar tape, tires, they're perishable, so they will wear out eventually. So when you try a new one, try. But just don't fall for the marketing. The only caveat to that I would say is if you're buying a bike because the marketing tells you an aero bike looks better and you're happy to buy it because you want a bike that you like the look of, by all means, go for it. But don't fool yourself into thinking that you need it.
Yeah, definitely don't stretch yourself financially for something that because it's going to get you a couple of watts, because it's not worth it.
The next common mistake is not challenging your sources. So when you speak to somebody, make sure that whoever is telling you something is good or is better than something else, that they've actually tried the something else or other things. We've seen it loads where we've got people in that have only ridden one brand of pedals, then going on telling everybody on their Facebook club groups that these are the best pedals. Unfortunately, they might be wrong, but essentially, if you've not ridden anything else, you don't know better. Same goes for tires, bike brands, different things. Just make sure whoever you're taking advice from has tried different things. In the shop, I put James on a new set of tires almost every single month, just so that we've got a bit of. He rides a lot. The kid's done close to 30,000 kilometers this year, so it's just a good test bench to kind of see, so that we're not just making up stuff based on bias. You need to try different things. Also make sure your info is up to date, because something might have been good 20 years ago, but technology might have moved on a lot.
Or vice versa. It might have been crap and now it's quite good.
Yeah.
I think as well, something that people have an issue with and you should definitely consider is certain people or certain shops have sponsorship and or product limitations. It's actually something that used to be considered back in my finance days, is there used to be a thing called a tied agent. And it essentially would mean that they could only sell certain financial products from certain sources rather than the whole of the market, which ultimately means that their opinion is biased. So it's ultimately the idea of if if someone in a shop is telling you this is the best product ever and they only sell 2 brands of that, then it's kind of limiting. Whereas if you can have a conversation where they are not limited by what they can access, then you're going to have a whole of market representation.
Yeah, I agree with you. So we in our shop, we don't stock bikes. Everything we're ordering for customers just stops us from falling into the trap, which is a difficult one, where if a bike shop's got 500 bikes in stock and you want to buy something, they are more likely if they're stuck with those bikes, to try and put you onto one of them purely because they need to get rid of the bikes.
That was a classic tale of Evan Cycles in this country, wasn't it? Mis-selling people the size bikes because they'd go, we've got this one we need to get rid of. Yeah, that one
it's
fits
much
you.
easier, yeah. And it's wrong, but unfortunately is one of those things that is a problem. Where I would say there's a difference is some shops would be picking brands not based on bias, but just they looked into the products. That's what they like. That's what they believe in, and that's fine. A good example for us is where people can give us the same criticism as SRAM Enduro bearings. But I believe in the product. And that's why I sell it. I still have the other options. If somebody comes in and says, I want Campag or I want Shimano, by all means, we'll get it for you. We will argue our case why we think what we like is better. But if that's what you want, then go for it. We're a Ceramic Speed service center, but I still prefer Enduro bearings. And that's just from my own testing and riding. So yeah. Next common mistake is letting wants outweigh needs. Yes, you might want something, but make sure before you buy a bike that you know what you want to do with the bike. Because buying a full aero racing road bike and using it in the winter as a commuter might not be the best choice. So just really consider what you want to use the bike for before you even go into the bike shop, and then have a conversation with them so they can steer you into the essentially it'll bring down your choices a lot more, which is better. So it can narrow down what's going to be best for what you want to do. And that's based on everything. It's frame size, frame shape, discipline, tire size, tire consistency. I mean, a racing tire in winter over here is not a good idea. Buy something with more puncture resistance or more grip. Definitely go for grip, but yeah.
You're definitely going to be quicker on your winter ride if you're not puncturing 5 times and slipping out on all of the corners.
Exactly, dying. And the last mistake, which is very specific, but I've noticed a lot lately, is bed your brakes in properly if you've got disc brakes when you're buying a new bike.
How do you do that, though?
How do you do that? There's loads of different brands and different manufacturers come up with different specs, but the overreaching argument is don't come to an abrupt stop too quickly on new brake pads. And when I say too quickly, I mean on the first ride. In an ideal world, you're going to speed up to about 20, 25 kilometers an hour and then pull your brakes. You can pull them fairly hard, but just before, when you get to a walking pace, let go of them again. So all you want is to heat up the pads, heat up the rotors, and that'll transfer pad resin onto your rotors. It'll work much better. SRAM, for example, if you don't do this properly, your bike's going to make like a gurgling noise. Like that.
It's the worst.
And people blame the brakes, but it's just because they've gone straight out, started pulling skids all over the parking lot with a new bike.
But that's what you're supposed to do with a new bike.
Just wait until you've done your first ride, bed it in properly, and your brakes are going to work better, last longer, and you're going to be a happy person. And when you want to stop, they're going to stop.
Thank you for that, Nick. If you have any things that you would like to add, sling them in the comments down below and help out your fellow audience member.